Welcome to the second episode of the Journal of Mormon Polygamy podcast, the JMP or Jump podcast. I'm your host, Tiani Coleman, the editor of the journal, and we are jumping into the articles with the author. And today we are featuring Clair Barrus with his article, The Lawless Women Revelation. Hi, Clair. It's good to see you.
Hi, it's good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
So today we're going to be talking about your article, The Lawless Women Revelation, and I would first like to introduce you. So Clair Barrus, he manages the Daily Digest, Today in Mormon History, and he's also a retired cloud platform engineer with a passion for skiing, hiking, and Mormon history, of course. So Clair's been featured at Sunstone retreats and academic conferences, including the Sunstone Symposium, the Mormon Media Studies Symposium, the John Whitmer Historical Association Conference, as well as the Mormon History Association Conference. He's also contributed book reviews to the Journal of Mormon History and the Association for Mormon Letters, and he's appeared as a guest on a lot of history-related podcasts. So he's a very experienced person to have, and we're happy that he was able to contribute an article to our podcast. So, Clair.
Yep.
First, would you be able to introduce to us, just in a few sentences, the main thesis of your article?
Yeah, the article is on the Lawless Women Revelation, which is a revelation that came from Heber C. Kimball in 1852. And it's a very esoteric and cryptic revelation. You read it and you're like, I don't know what he's talking about, but it's very intriguing. So this is my attempt to do a little sleuthing and try to find out who the lawless women are, who the spirits are that are talked about in this, what law was being fulfilled, and so forth and so on. So that's in essence what my article is about.
Yes, and it's a really interesting article. I really enjoyed it, being the editor on your article. One thing about your article is that I know that you introduced it at the conference that they had just a few weeks ago, and then you also have talked about it in the past. You have talked about it at, I think, another conference, as well as you've been talking about it on podcasts, but you've never published it before. And I just was wondering what the process was that you first started researching this and how you finally came to publish it.
Yeah. So I was actually researching the use of rods in divining rods in Mormon history, particularly Oliver Cowdery, and but I then came to realize that Heber C. Kimball also used a divining rod to receive revelations, and then I went on to read his revelations and found this lawless women revelation, and I was very intrigued by it. And I thought, man, I got to figure out what this is all about. So I dove in, and probably about 10 years ago, I presented a paper at the Sunstone Symposium about it. And I think I did a Year of Polygamy podcast on it also. But then I dusted it off a couple of years ago and decided to work with it some more and get it published. And so here we are. So that's kind of in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's really great. So you start out the article talking a little bit about who Heber C. Kimball was in relation to Revelations and a little bit about his background. Could you tell us a little bit more about Heber C. Kimball?
Yeah. He was a good friend of Brigham Young before, um, and then Brigham and Heber C. Kimball joined the church in the early Kirtland era, in the early 1830s. And before long, they were apostles, and in the early Quorum of the 12, with Joseph Smith as the prophet president. And then Heber C. Kimball went on to lead the very first foreign mission of the church, which was in England he was the leader of all that, and and he had a lot of throughout his life. He was a very visionary man. He spoke in tongues. He had revelations, visions, and saw signs in the heavens, and all that stuff. So he was had that kind of baked in his bones. And then when Joseph Smith died, there was a secession crisis in the church, and Brigham Young emerged as the one that was the most popular, and most about half of the members of Joseph Smith's organization followed Brigham out west, and Brigham became the prophet president with Heber C. Kimball as his first counselor. So that's, and then I guess important to note, Heber C. Kimball married a lot of women, 43 by my count, and he has been known as the most married man, at least up to that point in time, in the modern Western world. So he held the record, as far as we can tell, with the most marriages.
It's a great introduction to Heber C. Kimball. I'd like to make a little editorial comment for the viewers, which is not part of your paper, but our first episode focused on Joseph F. Smith. And after Hiram Smith, Joseph Smith's brother, died, Heber C. Kimball married Hiram Smith's wife, Mary Fielding Smith. And so he became the stepfather, and then Mary Fielding Smith died not too soon after, pretty soon after that, I mean. And so then Heber C. Kimball became the stepfather of Joseph F. Smith. So that kind of ties this second article and the first article. So I just wanted to say that quickly.
It's all related, right?
Yeah, it is.
All tied together.
Right. Okay, so back to your article. You talk about a few different revelations that Heber C. Kimball recorded that you discovered, small ones, right? But then you focus on three versions of one particular one. So I don't know if you want to jump right into those three versions and talk about, the
Sure.
differences in what you discovered, or if you want to mention any others first. But go ahead and.
Yeah, well, he began recording revelations in his journal in June of 1844, before Joseph Smith's death, and but his revelations come from his journal and journals, and also they found a book called the Memorandum, Heber C. Kimball's Memorandum book, and after he died, they didn't look through the whole thing, but later they discovered that there were a bunch of revelations written in the back of this memorandum book, which the other stuff earlier was just various records about crossing the plains and who owed who what, and some baptismal dates and just random things. So luckily, that wasn't lost. This memorandum book. Well, in there, like I said, a series of revelations, including three items that are recorded for the date of February 3rd, 1852. And they all begin very similarly, which tells us that there are three attempts to write the Lawless Women Revelation. The first version it says essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but I'm probably pretty close, Mr. K, he shall devote his entire time. That's all it says. And it has a date of February 3rd, 1862, but they cross that out and he corrects the date to 1852. So that seems to indicate that perhaps he's reflecting back in the 1860s and trying to remember this and revelation he had earlier, because it's not very often you accidentally write the wrong decade that's in the future. But we might go in the past, forget what, but it's very rare that we would say it's 2035 instead of 2025. So So that's the first item. The second item is longer, and it says, in essence, it says, "My son Heber," and so it's a really warm introduction. The other one was "Mr. K shall do this." Now it's changed to "My son Heber, he shall devote his entire time to the church and no longer be under the law of lawless women anymore in time." Uh, he's fulfilled that law in essence and will no longer be under the power of those spirits, uh, and shall no longer give heed to those spirits. And that's basically what it says. So this is a very cryptic, and this is the first version I came across, and I that's what was so intriguing. I'm like, what in the world are they talking about, or is he talking about? And this is what got me interested in this. And so and so the paper explores what the meaning of this might be. Now, the third version, uh, it's essentially starts out the same, except it's no longer the voice of the Lord to Heber. It's no, no, it's now Heber's voice. Heber says, "The Spirit told me that I shall devote my entire time to the church." Yada yada yada, and it says essentially the same thing as the second version. Then it appears that Heber came back later and added additional text, I think two times, to try to clarify the meaning of this revelation. And we know it was added, probably added later, because the voice changes from Heber's voice to the voice of the Lord, where the new text is added at the end. And so Heber seems to have lost track of who was talking, whether it was Heber or the Lord. Um, and then and then there's some additional evidence as maybe the last sentence was also added even later than that. The last sentence gives us some clues that really helps us understand. He says that the lawless women are of his house or his household. And so you're like, oh, uh, these are his plural wives that are lawless, that are not following Heber's law anymore. And Heber is being given permission to ignore, essentially separate from his independent minded wives, and that he needs to devote his time to the church instead of trying to deal with this very large family, especially these troubling wives that are making demands of him and basically dictating to him rather than Heber dictating to them, which is the way he thought it ought to be. So that's kind of the three versions of this revelation.
Yeah, that's great. And in the article, there are some really great charts that compare them, as well as one of the things I really love is that we have uh, an actual, picture of his writing for each one, and you get a little glimpse. You get to see it, the primary source right there in the
Yes.
article, but you also get a little glimpse of what Heber was like. He had a lot of misspellings, and you know he, but it's very interesting. So
Yeah, it's very rough and raw,
yes,
and you feel like you're right there, when he's doing this. And I had the opportunity to go and handle these revelations at the church archives, and it was quite an experience, to handle those. So, yep.
right, for sure. So you also talk in the article about some potential influences that might have influenced Heber C. Kimball when he was, that kind of influenced him to write these, kind of uh, inspired it or whatever. So would you talk a little bit about a couple of those influences?
Sure, sure. Yeah, there's several potential factors. So one is that it turns out that when he is marrying all these wives, there's one day where he marries the most he ever marries in a single day, which is 10 wives. And it's exactly 6 years earlier. So this is the anniversary of the largest marriage event that he has had. And so it's possible he was reflecting on this anniversary. That's one possibility. Um, but there's also some things going on. So at this point in time, the revelation was in 1852, February, and in 1851, in the fall, they started the session of the Utah Territorial Legislature, and their goal was to create a constitution, become a territory of the United States, and they needed to create the laws that would govern the state. And so Heber is a senior member of this legislative body, and he's involved in a lot of all the conversations about the various laws that are being passed. Well, there's a number of laws that are passed that are really quite interesting. So women before the beginning in the 1840s, for the first time in American history, women are beginning to get some ability to have some rights. They are able to engage publicly for the first time. So before this, women were expected to be at home, not be out in public, and to obey their husbands, and had little to no legal rights at all. And that's just the way it was. Things in the 1840s, we see the first suffrage movements going on by women. In the 1850s, we see laws beginning to be changed that grant women more rights. And this occurs also in the Utah Territorial Constitution. So we see women previously, like in a divorce proceeding, a woman would be appointed representation, but now she can choose her representative, legal representative, including another woman can be her representative. That's brand new in the United States. This is just beginning to happen. She also has a pretty good likelihood of taking custody of the children, where previously men almost always got custody of the children. She now, if the husband dies and has a will that leaves her nothing, she can sue and make claim to get some of that inheritance, something that she couldn't do before. So we see women being granted more rights. And so it's possible that Heber is reflecting on these progressive, for the time, changes and he's thinking about his own wives. And he's undergoing some divorces at this point in time and separations. And so these conversations might get him going, wow, and he's conservative for the time. He likes the old way, which was women should just be obedient, and that was their job, is to do what their husband said. And so that might have his wheels turning in his head, and might be part of why he had this revelation. Another factor going on in the legislature at the time is the idea, kind of this idea of hierarchical role reversal. So we have the African Americans, their status is being debated in the legislature, and Brigham is asserting the idea that a black man should never rule over a white man. And Brigham also proposes the hypothetical situation in his rhetoric within a few days of the Lawless Women Revelation, which is that if a priesthood leader marries an African American woman, that the man will essentially lose his priesthood, and that messes up this divinely established hierarchy that is both based on color, race, and on gender. And in Brigham and Heber's minds, those were sacred, divinely instituted hierarchies. And so Heber's also hearing discussions about this in the legislature, hearing from Brigham Young, perhaps private conversations, and And this may also be inspiring him because he has a role reversal problem in his family, just like Brigham is concerned about blacks and whites and so forth. And so that might also be an influence. So that's kind of what I explore in the paper.
Yeah, which is also a very, very interesting exploration. Um, so a couple of quick things to kind of start wrapping up here. One is you kind of talk about, in conclusion, how you think the revelation resolved things for Heber, right? And then also if you could just talk about how you think his Lawless Woman Revelation, how it factors into the hierarchical view of the church and the view of women in the church generally, how it kind of influences how the trajectory goes from there.
Sure, sure. Yeah, yeah. So my reading of Joseph Smith is that I think he starts out quite patriarchal, but I think by the Nauvoo era, and maybe sooner than that, he's becomes more progressive. And for his time, with both women and people of color, he is really quite progressive, even though by today's standards he may not appear that way. But we got to be careful with presentism and not insert our assumptions on the past. Joseph, I think, was quite progressive. Brigham and Heber were not. They were conservative and did not like the expanding role of women that was occurring. And so Brigham, we see a lot of, I go through a lot of teachings that Heber gives about women. And basically, I mean, it just kind of does what I've already been describing. There's this idea that emerges in his sermons and other rhetoric that shows that, in his view, Joseph Smith was the god of Brigham Young, and Brigham Young was the god of Heber C. Kimball. And Heber C. Kimball, he doesn't explicitly say he's the god of his wives, but he says he used rhetoric one time, basically to his wives, if you love me, you will keep my commandments, which is kind of in the role of Jesus. And so there's this very powerful patriarchal hierarchy defined in the rhetoric of Heber C. Kimball that continues after this revelation, both before and after it. And so I try to illustrate Heber's views as presented in his sermons, which is quite conservative.
So what did the Lawless Women Revelation accomplish for him as far as like how did it resolve things for him personally?
Well, he 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 felt so he ends up divorcing or separating from, as I calculate, about 36% of his wives. Um, he he is given, so his son noted that Heber had cried a bushel of tears over the problems in his family. I think he's got a heart and he's trying to manage this extremely large household, which is really impossible to give the emotional and financial attention necessary and be a father to the kids. I mean, that's impossible. But Heber is also at the same time first counselor in the church. But they're also building a government. They're managing everything. Heber and Brigham are running everything. And so Heber's in an impossible situation. There's no way that he can make his family happy. This, I think he must have got to a melting point, and this revelation, he writes this revelation that gives him permission to ignore only give heed to the meek, humble, obedient wives. In other words, the ones that don't give him any flack. They just accept their lot, and he doesn't have to. He can just ignore the rest. That's kind of what happens.
Yeah, so that's a good place to end, unless you have any other conclusion, any other thoughts or insights that you'd like to share before we close?
Um, well, just one thing that I talk about a little bit about in the paper that it's my initial thing that I found quite interesting is this use of a divining rod to receive revelations through that Heber does, and he has quite a few revelations that come through this divining rod. Oliver Cowdery had the divining rod also that we actually have a couple of sections in the Doctrine and Covenants that talk about this rod, but it's obscured, so we people don't know that unless they know what to look for, and so we have other apostles that apparently had divining rods also. So I think that's it's a bit of a tangent to this paper, but it is important. He may have received his revelation through the rod, but he didn't specifically state that like he does with some of his other revelations. But I thought that was kind of a fun, interesting side note.
Yeah, it definitely is. So Clair Barrus, thank you so much for joining us. I hope that this has made the readers really want to go in and read the article for themselves. There are a lot of podcasts out there that spend a lot of time talking. They last for an hour, two or three. This podcast, we're trying to keep it short and just entice the readers to go read the articles for themselves. So we hope that you will read his article in the Journal of Mormon Polygamy. It's on our website, journalofmormonpolygamy.org, and it's called The Lawless Women Revelation. And again, Clair Barrus, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.